The state legislature has to revisit the question of top management for the MBTA to advance reforms with improvements after the massive breakdown in the winter of 2015. The T was placed under a Fiscal and Management Control Board. The Pioneer Institute recently came out with a brief on what should happen next. To tell us about it is the Institute's Executive Director, Jim Stergios. Thank you very much for being with us, Jim.
Thank you for having me.
Jim, a lot of us would agree that there's been a lot more leverage for change on the T over the past 5 years, but how much of the story has that been a factor of the board?
So I think it's been a big result of the board's work. It is an amazing board. These are 5 individuals who show up every week. They meet frequently. They spend half their days there, if not more. It's something that was supported by the Speaker of the House strongly. In fact, someone who's close to him, Joseph Aiello, is the chairman, someone who has a wonderful history in transportation circles. I think that all people who are respected, who bring various expertises to the board, and I think that's crucial for the argument that we're making about what the next phase of the control board should be. Look, this is a question that matters now because on June 30th of this year, the board expires. So to some degree, it's what we want to do is build on the successes of the first phase. And the first phase brought us, look, the T would have been about $400 million in deficit on an annual basis. They are now probably about $30 million in deficit. That matters not so much to the riders, I think, in the abstract, but it means that they've been putting more money into fixing the T, and that does matter to the riders. They've brought a whole lot of transparency. They meet every week. People come and speak to them. They put all of their minutes, they put their presentations up for everyone to see if they want to see it. There's much more in terms of measurement of performance. If we want to understand how Keolis is even doing, they've done a fine job of tracking that and forcing Keolis to make that stuff public. This is all good for riders. Look, in a nutshell, I could give you one example of something they've done, which I think is just tremendous. The ride, which we all know is a paratransit service, a wonderful service for folks who are either indigent, are handicapped, or elderly. There was talk before the control board of cutting back that service because it costs so much. It's costing $50 or $60 a ride, all right? The control board, working with the then general manager, Brian Shortsleeve, advanced a proposal to have Uber and Lyft and private taxis provide that service. And now they're probably providing about 20%, 25% of the overall paratransit rides. They're coming in at $13 a ride. And they're also, you don't have to go and reserve a day in advance. These are good things for riders because it means we're not cutting back on service, number one. And two, you get to call at your convenience, and we're all much more used to the idea of, hey, I want to reserve maybe 10 minutes from now, not 24 hours in advance.
You brought up one interesting deficiency about this board, and you wish they had more expertise about the emerging technologies around fare collection. You don't want them to be a rubber stamp for a political machine, but on the other hand, they can't just duplicate management. So what exactly should this board be?
So I think the second phase should be just like the first phase, composed of 5 experts who bring expertises that are necessary for now. The first phase was focused on labor costs and productivity, and that was very much necessary because then when you looked at the data, the T was not producing at a rate that was going to allow us to actually fix the system and do the things, run the system that we wanted to. The second phase is it's necessary to have focus on management, not labor. Management is what's holding us up. We have about $1.6 billion that in the abstract we could spend every year on upgrades. We're currently spending $1 billion. It's because we don't have the management capacity to do it. And why not? We don't have the procurement processes, the capital delivery processes. Project management is a problem. Transportation technology is a problem. Contracting is something of a problem. Look, the automated fare collection 2.0, this tap on, tap off system that we've been talking about for years, was a contract that was let for $700 million. It's going to cost us a heck of a lot more than that now, and it's going to be 2 years delayed. And why is that? It's in part because the management doesn't have the talent. But I also believe this is no criticism of the current board. But that board, in order to oversee such a complex project, has to have someone who understands transportation technology, project management, because without that, no one's asking the hard questions. Hard questions are maybe not that hard. In the recent, one of the recent meetings, it was revealed that when the T signed the contract, they assumed that there were certain technologies that were mature, that is available on the market as part of Cubic's project. Cubic is the provider of the service. They weren't there. So those hard questions have to be pecked at repeatedly early on. Otherwise, we get into contractual arrangements that are going to waste a lot of money. We're going to spend over $200 million more, and we're going to wait 2 years more, and we may not get all the bells and whistles that were promised in the beginning. This is not a good outcome for the public.
Of course, one thing I'm sure you're well aware of, Mayor Walsh wants a Boston seat on the board. Maybe it doesn't have to be Boston exactly, but shouldn't there be something on this board that is really tied to the epicenter of all these problems, whether it's transportation, gridlock, the job growth and housing that we have in a place like Boston? I mean, shouldn't there be a voice for that on the board?
I don't think so. And I respect the mayor greatly. I think he's doing in some ways a great job, in some ways a less great job. On this one, this is a bad proposal. It's a bad proposal not because it's a Boston representative. If you have a Boston representative, we will have a Metro West North-South representative. We are starting to chop up the riders. The strength of the reform movement lies in the frustration of the riders. If the riders don't express their frustration en masse and not, oh, I got my goodie, you didn't get your goodie, we can't separate them out because the political force behind this whole movement is the riders. I believe that the riders, my firm belief is the rider should communicate frequently and often with the T. I'm mad as you know what, I'm not going to take it anymore because otherwise we're going to go to the same old. And the riders have every right to be frustrated. We have made, I think, great progress in some ways, not nearly fast enough in others. And I just hope we stick with the riders en masse as one, not separate them out into political constituencies.
This is Being the News. We're talking with Jim Stergios from the Pioneer Institute. Jim, another thing you draw attention to here is a problem that was noted in the report on safety on the T about the management culture, all of this blame shifting and distrust that was going on. Sounds like something I've heard about a lot of organizations maybe, but how can a Fiscal and Management Control Board do something about that on the T?
It's a great question. So one of the things we can do is this. I think that the control board is meeting too often. When you meet too often, the top managers are looking up, we call it managing up to their bosses, and not spending enough time communicating within the organization, not just at the managerial level, but at the very, very frontline worker. These are our priorities. If you think about it, the safety report said something I found astounding. It said that folks who are providing the service were not clear on what the priorities of the top managers were. They didn't know that safety was number one, that safety is number one, right? If that's not getting through, it means number two priority, number three priority, certainly not getting through. That's one thing we can do is maybe meet every couple of weeks, every 3 weeks. They can still do their work. But the second thing that I think is really important is this. The success of the control board in phase one was not just the talent of the individuals in the room and the hard work they did with the folks at the T. It wasn't just the laborers who decided to come up with creative contracts to save some money and do the work better. It was the fact that there was the sort of Damocles being held over their head, which was an exemption from the state's Pacheco law, which is an anti-privatization law. With the relaxation of that, it allowed the general manager at the time and the control board to put up against labor, hey, if we don't change the way we do business, we're going to bring in an outside contractor. And they did that in certain instances. In the new phase, this second phase, that Pacheco law exemption, while it might be helpful, is not necessary. The real problem now is management, not labor. In order to get at the management culture that you're talking about, we believe that an independent auditor should be created. And that is an auditor who the control board says, we can't figure out why this is not working. Go and study that, come back to us with a report and tell us you have the power to dig as deep as you need to dig. Look, there are things within the T that are really problematic, and a control board saying to management, hey, you need to look at this, is not good enough. Having an auditor within the Mass Department of Transportation, which is under the aegis of a political hire, Stephanie Pollack, respect her greatly, but she's still a political hire. We need someone, that's not going to be enough. We need an independent auditor. I'll give you one example as to why I say this. It may surprise you, but frequently, when folks are cutting checks at the MBTA, they may not even have all the documentation that they need. There's not a centralized documentation system. That's a 101 about how to manage finances. And when you don't have that in place, all kinds of things can happen. And I think we have to look at all of the issues within management and make sure we're fixing them.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Jim Stergios from the Pioneer Institute.